All right, I'd like to just take a little further on that trajectory. You have your collection of stories, Meryl, and I haven't read the book, but I read about it, and it's a very successful book. And in the descriptions of it, it said stories having to do with women's bodies. Is that it? So, that's an interesting description. What about women's bodies? Or how do you come to, is that true? Tell us about that.
Well, Nora was about women's lives.
Yeah.
Almost all the stories were about Jewish women, but not only. Not all of them. I think it's interesting because in Fields of Exile also, there's a lot about the body in it. I think, and I come at this not only theoretically in terms of feminist theory about the body and the embodiment of experience and so forth, but I think the body is a very profound reflection of everything else. I think that there's a kind of memory in the body of things that you don't remember. And I think once one gets in touch with that personally, once characters get in touch with that, there's a whole other reality that you understand about life. I think we are physical beings, much as we often don't like to think of ourselves that way. And I don't mean just sexually at all. I mean, we're sentient beings, we're sensual beings. And I think when, that kind of dissociation that many people feel or use as a defense against various pains in life, where you just don't feel the pain. You don't even feel pain in your body. You just distance things. And I think once you really let yourself experience life at a real level, at a deep level, your body tells you stuff. And the women in my stories and in my novel have bodies. They don't always want to know what their body's telling them.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
It's a place of pleasure, it's a place of pain, like the mind with the heart, right? But sometimes when I'm reading somebody who leaves the body out, it's someone who has feelings and thoughts that go body. There's a part, I respond to that. I feel like, why don't we know what their body feels like? It's a very intimate, but a very essential part of a human being. And how can you have a character without a body? I don't get that. Doesn't mean you can't write really well. But it's something, it makes me wonder if this is a writer who doesn't connect enough with themselves.
I want to ask you about Jewish fiction about that as well, but I'd like to hold on to that question. Let's come back into this book, this particular novel. So in that collection of stories, dealing with women's bodies and the body, and now it's much more political or a novel of ideas, among other things, by the way, too. So what brings you to this particular theme?
It's really interesting because this novel is being constantly related to, and I understand why, as a political novel. When I wrote Marrow and other stories, I considered it very political, in the broadest sense of political. It was about women's lives. The Jewish women are dealing with sexism and anti-Semitism, and the non-Jewish women are dealing with sexism. And for people like me, politics, the personal is political, the political is personal, and it's essential to everyday life. But no one related to Marrow that way. It was just personal stories of women. And suddenly this book, I've written a political novel. So I've been on a blog tour and doing a lot of Q&A. And one of the questions is, why did you write a political novel? And what's your advice for writers who want to write political novels? And I had to stop and even think, what is a political novel? I mean, it's not something that's necessarily obvious. I was reading your novel at the same time. And I was thinking, which is about, very crudely put, the experience of people like Lithuania during World War II and years following. And, there's no way for that character, the main character, or any of the characters to escape history, time and place, right? So, the conclusion I reached, which I guess is not theoretically sophisticated, but sort of sums it up, I concluded it's a political novel if the context, the background and context becomes one of the characters. So in my novel, the issue of not just the university setting, but the issue of anti-Israelism, and it's both reality becomes a character. So in that sense, people think it's a book about a political issue, a textual issue, so it's a political novel. And I accept that. I'm not comfortable with that. But I just find it sort of funny to think that my first book was considered a political, that it's emotional. And this one is political.
You know, people will react in various ways. Also, all the labels are attempts to get a hold of things.
Yeah.
You could say that it's a political novel, a novel of ideas, or even buildings roman too. So you know, all these various categories that you slide through.
Yeah.
But you know what that is exactly. Let's not worry about it. But coming back to that central question, where did this thing come from now?
Well,
now is the wrong word. How long ago? When did you start it?
It took 7 years to write.
Right. So.
And I actually didn't start it 7 years ago. It took a while to find a publisher.
Right.
So it's been a little while. But
right. But also at the time.
At the time, you know, as you know, I think as many people know, when you write fiction, it's not like writing, or not the way I wrote academic or nonfiction work, where you decide this is an interesting topic, I'm going to approach this topic, I will gather data on this topic. When one, or I anyway, write fiction, it's very much an unconscious process. You write, and then you look at what you've written, you go, oh, I know I thought that. Actually, there's stories I wrote in Nora. There's one in particular which I don't go into now. It's not the topic of the day, but several years later, I reread the story and understood what it was about. It wasn't at all what it looked like. It was about what I thought it was about. So one doesn't always know every time it comes about. When I started this novel, I thought it was a satire on academic life. I had recently left my academic position, and I was full of cynicism. Cynicism was too strong. I was a little sarcastic. I saw the great things about the Ivory Tower, and even the Ivory Tower that's connected to the community. But I also had an edge on it. You know, I'd been in it long enough to see its flaky. So I thought I was trying my hand at satire for the first time. It didn't work very well because I'm not a satire person. And I'm just not. It's not my temperament. I love my characters. It's just not my way.
By the way, it's hold on. There's some of the characters, some of the teachers in particular get it.
They get it. They got it.
I had a terrible, sorry for the digression, but I had a very tough German teacher called Hermann Humber, and I used that name as the first person to be killed in one of my novels. But I wanted to know, we'll let a few people have it
too. Absolutely.
Right. We'll call them fictional characters.
Absolutely.
Right.
But there are writers who are satirists. I mean, anyway, never mind classification. The answer to your question is that I didn't know. If you had asked me at certain points at the beginning, are you writing a novel about anti-materialism on campus, I would have said no. I'm making fun of the academia. And talking about the unconscious is who you are. You're one person, you have one mind, one heart, one body, basically. You don't, cut yourself into pieces when you're writing. You do in other kinds of work, when you're professional in other contexts, but when you're writing, there's no separation. And I started getting upset about anti-Israelism way before everybody else because, and it was interesting.
You wrote about it in the Star.
Oh, that was recently, a couple years ago. I came back from Israel in 1981, and by mid-80s, I was seeing what was happening. And I think I was taught faster than other people because I just come from Israel and I was Israeli. I have dual citizenship, and I just smelled it. And people said, oh, you're being too sensitive. I wasn't too sensitive. I was sensitive, and I saw what was happening. And I began writing about it academically. I published a paper, which there was a big brouhaha. They accepted it and then rewrote it into a totally innocuous piece of nothing, marshmallow paper. And I said, you can't publish that. You publish what I wrote. And they finally published what I wrote. It was called Putting Anti-Semitism on the Anti-Racism Agenda. It dates it because now we talk about anti-oppression, but anti-racism agenda in schools of social work in North America. And I showed how anti-Semitism is not on the agenda. It isn't taught anywhere in North America. American schools of social work in a systematic way. I haven't done research in the past couple of years, but last time I looked, there were 1 or 2 schools teaching it when there was a professor, when someone cared. You know, there's a curriculum that's required by the Canadian Association of Schools for Social Work, and there's the equivalent American organization, and it isn't required. You get accredited, you have to teach every other fundamental oppression. You don't have to include anti-Semitism. This stuff really pissed me off, obviously.
So this is, I don't know how widely this is known. So this, a lot of this was all news to me. Even the whole anti-oppression category was news to me too. So are you finding it, or am I the only one?
No, that's delightful for me, because the truth is, I didn't write this for people who, like me, know about this stuff and are in it. I wrote it actually for Canadians, and I didn't even write it for Jews. I wrote it for the general Canadian community. That's why there's a glossary of fact, because I believe and believe that there are just a lot of smart, well-meaning Canadians who just don't know that this is happening. And the same way that I'm grateful to learn about Lithuania in the war, post-war period, and I'm very grateful when I read about the experiences of women of color and with Native women and all sorts of groups. I thought somebody, you know, people, probably good people, you know, people who are not invested in hating Israel for whatever psychological or political reason, will find this not only interesting, but will want to read this. I don't know.
No, I agree. I'm sure you look at me because I'm smiling. Just keep talking about Bible. We're not talking about Bible.
I know. You said conversation, not interview. So
all right. Okay, we can spar a little bit. Let's come right into the character. Let's come right into Judith. You read the part that expresses her love for Israel. And well, by the way, she has a boyfriend there. She doesn't like her boyfriend. But she has a love interest, as they say in movies. Israel. And I found it fascinating because he's referred to as a man of the land. But in effect, he's like a male personification of Israel. So it's all for better, for worse, in some cases. So I thought, that's just a note. You want to put that down. That's not yet my question. The question, as she comes back into Judith, back to that central character. So she's back in Canada. She's come to see her father. He dies, and she makes that promise. It's almost like a fairy tale where you make a promise. You don't know what the results are going to be. And the promise is to stay, to get the master's of social work, which she does because she has to, because she made the promise. But she's profoundly unhappy in Canada. Profoundly, and using the term, which I will discuss, well, let's explore that a little bit. You talk about her unhappiness here. She grew up here, and she's been living in Israel for 10 years. She's unhappy being back. So can you explore that, describe that unhappiness?
Well, this is the whole concept of exile, home and exile, which of course isn't a conceptual fulcrum just for Jews. There are diaspora communities, of course, all possible diaspora communities. In Jewish tradition, the whole concept of exile is very central. It's we were on our land, we were in our home, in Israel, we were exiled, and we were waiting 2,000 years to get back. And in 1948, we got our home again. And in the interim, in the thousands of years in the interim, the longing for Zion, for home, has been a central theme in Jewish poetry, literature, philosophy, theology. It's fundamental to Jewish thinking to feel alienated. That isn't to say that Jews living in Canada don't feel at home in Canada. But I think the Jewish soul longs for Zion. You know, one of the great poets who wrote talks about, you know, I'm the edge of the west and my heart is the east. And I think for any of us, I mean, for Jews who are not fully assimilated, but who care deeply about their identities, whatever their politics about Israel, one longs for home. And I understand her. I also understand that when she's at a certain point in the book, when she's in Canada, she suddenly feels at home, profoundly oh my gosh, I feel ashamed, right? It's the political, and actually it's interesting because the title, on this blog tour, one of the questions was about my title. And the title is taken from a poem by one of the most beloved Israeli poets and most read in Wales. A poem she wrote when she was 10, which is unbelievable, which was recently discovered in her diary, called Exile. And it's about, exile, this terrible word, the pain, the wrongs, the murders, but yet I rejoice in the fields of exile. And she was one of few Israelis. She was hugely influential. She was educated in German universities, and she spoke in over 5 languages. And she was one of the very few Israeli poets or writers at the time who had the courage to admit that exile is pretty good. She was on to German universities. Israel was like, she was, I don't know, 30s, 40s, whatever, early, and it was basically a marshland. It was culturally, she was a leader, and there were, of course, some great poets, but it was not a university environment. She just made things. This is all, I guess, long digress is what it's saying, that anyone who has any feeling for Jewish history, Jewish poetry, Jewish culture, Jewish longing of any kind, focuses on Israel. And that sort of accusation that one sometimes hears, well, we're Canadian Jews, is it not even a bit common, whatever, but where's loyalty, all of that. I set that aside, and the same way that I have friends who are Greek and love Greece and go back there for all their holidays, doesn't mean anything. Very proud Canadian, love Canada, and it's one of the greatest countries in the world. And I love Israel, I belong to Israel, and it's like that.
Let's step out of the political way and out of the national sort of, let's get into her everyday life. Let's get right into university classes. I have to say, those university classes,
out of politics into the university.
Well, right. It's all right. I want to talk a little bit about a few things, about her instructors, her friends, and a bit of detail about them. So I have to say that she isn't wowed by her instructors for the most part, right? To say the least.
To say the least.
Right. So she has a disappointment of having to be in Canada, a disappointment of having to follow up on her promise to her father, and now she's in class and she's disappointed again.
So actually, she finds them very different.
Right.